Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
Our conversation today will be covering a topic that I think many people may take for granted. It's something in the background, but it's super important how you think about how you're securing your digital infrastructure and your systems on campus for students and faculty and staff to access. So I will admit, as much as I love technology, I'm a bit of a lay person when it comes to these sort of things. So I'm sure I'll be learning as much as our listeners will, but we will start out with our guest introducing themselves and going over their professional background, and then we'll get to the rest of our conversation.
Great. Thanks, Dustin. My mission out there is to turn everybody into a cybersecurity geek. So we'll have you come around to it. No problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Kim Biddings, VP of Product here at BioKey International. A little bit about me, been in cyber over 10 years now. Absolutely love the subject, have been in all kinds of different really vendor organizations throughout my career, but helping all kinds of institutions solve key cybersecurity challenges. At BioKey, we focus on identity and access management. And really, if you think about that, it is figuring out a very easy way for people to securely access the resources that they need, and then make it an easier and more usable experience for them, right? A lot of times security falls short because it's cumbersome or causes friction. And in higher ed, it's extremely important that that's not the case for all the different user groups, students, faculty, and staff. Our main solution's used by over 200 higher ed institutions called Portal Guard. And for any techies listening in, it offers multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, and self-service password reset with the unique offering of biometric authentication. So,
yeah. I guess I will say I pretty much know what all those things are, so I feel like I'm off to a really good start. But and I guess maybe one area that I'm going to show my like naivete is like, do you sort of go in both, because obviously so much anymore is, you know, digital, like everything that a student's maybe going to do, especially that they're fully online student, might be digital, but you might have you know, hybrid students, and certainly still a lot of fully on ground, you know, residential students or commuter students. So like there's obviously like a hardware part of security of like, if you're doing something, you know, like a biometric, you know, if you're scanning your fingerprint or whatever, in addition to like a multi-factor authentication that you're doing when you're trying to get on your computer and stuff. So I guess just maybe speaking to that as well, because I feel like there's a lot of different dynamics of as to like what you all do when it comes to those sort of things.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head in the digital sense, right? So if you think about higher education 10 years ago, we weren't talking as much nearly right about digital. Then you fast forward to COVID in the pandemic, and everybody had to go online, right? Everybody brought technology in. And so those infamous words of digital transformation just got gasoline thrown on that fire, right? It was a very rapid thing. When you think about where we sit and what we focus on with higher ed and really any company that we work with, it's the login, right? So whether that's the login screen of your computer when you first sit down and open your laptop, or that's the login screen of you trying to get into the Pathify portal, right? Those are the front door of what these services and applications and really the things that students, faculty, and staff need to run the institution and also get their education. So that's what we're all about, right? Is securing that front door of access, that login screen, but then also giving people relief, right? Like once you've logged in, the single sign-on part basically says, all right, we know it's Dustin. He's done the strong authentication up front. Let's not make you have to log in 100 times over again as you access your email or your courses or LMS or SIS, right? You don't want people to constantly have to log in and prove who they are if they've already done that. So a lot of it, and really security always comes down to security versus usability or security versus convenience. And that's really the rub when people go to put these solutions in.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because like my brain always thinking in metaphors and stuff like, yeah, like the tug of war of like, you know, you could have an immensely secure system that is just so clunky and like, you know, nobody even cares to use it because they have to like, you know, go through all these hoops or something, or like all the like different doors opening and whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, 'cause it is the idea though of like, you know, the needs of education, like it makes me think of like, I mean, like healthcare, I'm sure, similarly just needing to be like very uh particular about privacy and security, but then like the I guess the parallels continue, but like just thinking that like a lot of campuses are like little cities and stuff, because it's the idea of like, okay, you're paying bills, you're like, registering and, doing all these different tasks and things that likely are a variety of different like platforms and things like that. But I guess just, you know, as I'm sort of like waxing on all these things, but like from your perspective, like what are those unique needs of you all working in the cybersecurity space when it comes to higher education?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on some of them. And it's always been surprising to me because higher ed is not always the front runner, to be honest, in the latest and greatest in cybersecurity. It's typically financial institutions, right? And that's been historic, mainly because of compliance.
Hmm.
Compliance is a motivating factor for most security implementations or things that people are trying to do. The fascinating part about higher ed, what you just mentioned, is there's PCI compliance, there's HIPAA compliance, right? There's many hospitals running, there's many financial departments, there's online learning situations, there's privacy controls and personal information that you gather about a student in a single student record that's extremely valuable to a bad actor, right? So that's one of the unique things is, and one of the leading universities in the country once said to me, he goes, "We're just like this glued together bucket of all different industries," and that's really true, right? In the sense that you have healthcare, financial, and other things implying, and even regulatory, right? Research labs, we see that all
Mm.
the time. The restrictions around research labs. I think the other really unique thing I'd call out and that stood out to me when you asked that question is this is all about identity, right? It's about how do I know, Dustin, you are who you say you are in a digital world. That's what most of this comes down to, because if I know that, I can trust you and I can let you have access. Higher ed has, first of all, very different user groups, right? Faculty and staff are wildly different than students in a lot of cases. You have a great range of tech savviness, is the nicest way I can put it, where you have some folks that are not tech savvy at all. And then you have students, right? Younger generations actually that they grew up on technology and they have different expectations. And then the last part about that is that there's a very transient set of people coming in and out of a
Mm.
education institution, but also you have a very long-lived identity in some cases where that person that was an applicant that had to register and sign up for an account to maybe apply becomes an active student, then graduates, becomes an alumni. That's an identity that someone has to manage at that university, right? My husband, for example, went to USC as an undergrad, fight on Trojans. He still uses his alumni email address. So somebody at USC is managing his account or managing that identity. So there's just some really interesting nuances that come in and user expectations that come in that change the dynamic of security for higher ed.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and yeah, anymore, just like how I was mentioning, like just even like the student user group, like, from say 20 years ago, of probably, mostly right out of high school, residential. So maybe it's much more like on a hardware basis or different things like that. But it's like, no, you're having adult learners who maybe didn't go to school over those past 20 years and they're completely online or like, just, and you need to, which again, I think the parallel for, you know, cities and these like big kind of enterprise systems kind of thing where they have to be like accessible on all of these fronts where it's like, hey, if you want to fax us something, you want to call us, you want to like do any of these sort of things, you have to kind of keep all those spinning plates working and secure and
Well,
all those sort
yeah,
of things.
and
But
now we're in the environment, by the way, that there's like a cyber day where basically if a school has a ransomware attack, they call off school because they can't
hmm.
run school without the technology. So again, technology's done beautiful things for us, right? It gives us a lot of benefit, a lot of connectivity. You can actually take a class um, at a university that's across the world, which is a fascinating, amazing thing to be able to do. However, we also have to realize that all that connectivity, if it's abused or if it's ransomed or other things happen, actually has real life impact. It actually stops schools. You saw that, I think, LA school district, right, is one of the most famous recent ones. they had to call school off. We don't have snow days anymore in Boston. We're going to have ransomware days where the systems are down. So that's the difference that's really shifted. And honestly, the awareness, I think, has reached a new critical point where most people have heard the words now of ransomware and cybersecurity and multi-factor because it's become so mainstream of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, the for better or worse, yeah, like it started to impact people's daily lives in those ways where I think you've seen the same thing where like, I guess I could just keep falling back on this metaphor where it's like just like cities are like taken offline because they're targeted, whatever. It's just like if you need any of these social services, it's like, sorry, like I mean the best we could do maybe is like we write your name down on a piece of paper and we'll follow up with you or something, like,
Mhm.
they
And it's
try to
been
just
happening
lay
for
that, but
decades, or like
yeah.
at least a decade, if not more, by the way. That's the
Hmm.
crazy part is, people ask me, it's like, we've known these things are out there. We know they're possible. We know they were coming. And that's why I say gasoline on the fire, because if cybersecurity wasn't in place and good hygiene wasn't in place and people were treating cyber a bit like an insurance policy, like, well, if it happens,
Hmm.
people got caught. People got severely caught in the unfortunate side of things, which is there's some really bad actors out there, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I think that's been a dynamic shift as well. But ransomware isn't a new thing. These cyber attacks are not new. It's just now that it's such a huge disruption if it happens. That's really caused the extreme side of things. So.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so I guess, yeah, building off of that, like, you know, so with all these different kind of use cases and constituents and stakeholders that higher ed is dealing with, it's going to be that tug of war that you're balancing simplicity with security. Um, and I think part of it in my mind is like, thinking through a lot where like you do have to kind of take the time to really like explain like, okay, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, and whatever else, because like something that I've had some conversations about over the past year, because again, it's been sort of an ascendant part of this, digital transformation, which an overused buzzword, whatever, but
The buzzword.
like
Yes, we are living it.
is like online proctoring, where it's like, hey, just like if you're in like a lecture hall taking a test and somebody's kind of watching over you, or they check your ID or whatever, like we're working to create digital solutions for that, but like sometimes people are kind of like stumbling into it where it's like, oh, I'm taking my exam on, online or whatever. And, it's something that's tracking their movements or different things. And it's just like very off putting, but you
Mhm.
can help to try to alleviate some of that by, preempting it, explaining it, having it maybe like embedded into, uh, students onboarding, especially like online students, that they get oriented around these tools. So I think that's sort of where my brain is going, is like that being, I think, one very tangible example where I've seen, if you don't acknowledge that there's, some sort of reticence or complexity or sort of, ambiguity that,
Mhm.
especially like adult learners are coming into, you're going to just hit those like friction points, or people are going to get frustrated. So some of those things around balancing the simplicity with security and higher ed, like, why is that so important, and just sort of advice that you have around that.
Yeah, and I think what you highlighted too, and I say this all the time, is cybersecurity is everybody's problem. It used to be like IT security, right? They need to be really concerned with it, and they do. However, if you are a remote person, if you have a machine of any kind, I'm sitting in my home office, I have responsibility for cybersecurity of my company or any company that I'm doing business with. And that goes also for students. So cyber awareness training and actually like training someone as to why it's important. That's the other point you mentioned. A lot of times we see friction because IT will be like, hey, we need to enforce multi factor authentication. You're going to use biometrics. This is when it's going to be enabled. When you log in next time, it'll look like this.
Mhm.
And the person doesn't understand, but why in the first place are you putting me through these extra hoops and hurdles, right? The good news about what I would say from a higher ed perspective is you do have students, and students, most of them are more tech savvy. And actually, with the balancing, the security and simplicity side of things, they actually have very high expectations. And that's where I think that colleges, universities, higher ed in general just needs to start focusing on. You have to remember that the most beautifully designed portal system, whatever that is is gated by a login screen. That's the first impression that they have of your organization. And if that's clunky and they got to spend time on the help desk call and they're locked out and they're miserable, right? It's not a good first experience. I looked up a stat I had found actually in 2021. 87% of students actually said that the tech savviness of the school that they were looking at was a very important factor in their decision to enroll. The other factor that they look at is, can this organization keep my data safe? So the other reason I say that cybersecurity and that simplicity, security balance and everything has to be kept is because it's one thing to say, well, yeah, you're going to get ransomware, but it's another if I tell you brand and reputational damage and loss of enrollment money is going to be a significant impact. The last example I'll give you, and I it's a sad case to read about, but it's one that's very factually accurate, which is Lincoln College, in business 157 years, right? Providing education, and a ransomware attack took them down and they went out of business. They actually stopped being in business after 157 years. So there's real implications to the outcome of this business that is higher ed that needs to be considered and should be talked about all the way up to the top, right? Presidents, et cetera, should be talking about these concerns. So I think even more so, more than ever, it's important that they balance both of those. On the security side, the last thing I'll say is it depends on the risk. So what I see also as improper security controls is, well, we need to just secure everything. We're worried about ransomware. We're just going to blanket out the security control. And what really needs to be done is, well, how risky is Dustin logging into X? Maybe it's your social media or something, right? But how risky is it for him to request financial aid? And how important, for example, is it that we know that Dustin, you're the one that took that exam, not your buddy sitting next to you or that we know for sure you're that person if you're remote or digital. So again, balancing security depends on how much risk. And I think even more so, the user experience and tech savviness of a university is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it makes me think of a kind of like a funny example. I remember from like early days of like emergency remote learning where everybody was using Zoom, but just putting out like public links, one way or another, and people would just like troll.
There's like some creepy person that jumps into your Zoom.
Right. So like that idea of like, obviously that's super simple. Like, hey guys, here's where we're taking class and all that. But then, easily and quickly kind of, fell on their face with that. And it makes you think of the idea of, proctoring, where it could be like, well, we have the tool, we've got the thing that, facilitates online proctoring, but it's like, well, you realize you would need to like have the person be authenticated coming in, like the idea of like checking an ID at the door or something like those kind of things where like,
Right.
there's that part of intentionality where like, and I guess I say that hoping that, I guess that use case I'm sure exists somewhere. Somebody didn't think through like, oh, okay, how do we actually authenticate somebody coming into the Zoom call or whatever? And we've got the proctoring tool, but like, it is about the tools, but it is also about, like thinking through kind of the user experience, explaining why you're doing it, so it doesn't just feel like a chore or that's something people are going to try to like get around or whatever. But it is definitely so powerful recognizing, because this is just also just generally good advice around designing a user experience. Is like, if a person is hitting repeatedly like points of friction, they've got to like click way more times than they feel as though they should have to, because again that's sort of a squishy thing, but like thinking through like, yeah, it should be easy to set up that two-factor authentication or whatever, multi-factor authentication, whatever, and that they understand why they're doing it. And that even, I mean, like, it would be obviously like so refreshing if you would see maybe more leaders kind of advocating or doing sort of the sort of awareness building of like, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we appreciate everybody's sort of diligence around these sort of things. Because like, I'm thinking back to past experiences where the only thing that you would be getting is like a fake phishing email that like they're trying to see if you fall for. And if you didn't, then they're like, oh, you fell for it. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I said I had a package at the office or whatever.
That's for them. And by the way, the best security to me is designed with a person in mind, right? And passwords are the classic example of when it's friction filled. Look what we do. We write them down. We reuse the same ones, right? We make them stupid easy to guess. Like we find ways as humans to avoid the friction. And so the best rollouts I've seen are ones where they've taken the time to go find cyber champions across different parts of the institution and figure out, well, what does this group need, right? One example is we had a customer roll out authentication, stronger authentication, and it was good for like 95% of the users that they had, which is great. There was one building on campus that received no cell phone service whatsoever, and they were trying to text codes as the second factor. And so they had to scramble and go, oh my gosh, I have to find another authentication method for these users. And again, are you going to cover all use cases? It's difficult, but you want to ask people how they work. What are they accessing? Why are they accessing it? When do they access it? From where, right? Because that gives you a good profile of somebody to then understand their daily workflow and put security in. Don't hand them security and say, now you have to work around it, because they do work around it. And oftentimes it's circumvented and not secure anymore. So, yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, that's like, just to kind of keep riffing on that, is just like advice that you would give to hired leaders about this. Cause I think there's just been a lot of great stuff already. I think about like trying to empower those champions and the way that you're doing, the awareness training and different things like that. So just any other advice that you would give to folks to, just try to make sure that, because I think, that would be the tragedy where like people are like putting things in place and just sort of like, all right, we're good and whatever. But then people are just sort of like circumventing or whatever, so it's like, okay, all of your effort is for naught because you didn't, you checked off the one box and none of the others, and those sort of things. So I guess just other advice to balance simplicity with security and make sure that you have a system that's like truly secure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the focusing on your people when you're implementing these things, getting your cyber champion. The other thing I would say is really for access, it has to be, I say Uber-like, in the sense it's on demand, it's when I want it, where I am, immediately when I request it. And that gives you that really amazing experience that is often trying to be provided. Again, could help your enrollments, right? Could make students stay with you. There's a lot of benefits for that. But I think that's very, very important too, is the experience that you're giving people. Again, what I've seen also happen is complete security sacrifice and all usability. So, well, we can only roll out this very weak authentication, or we're going to open ourselves up to this cyber risk, but because my users just won't use this. And that comes with, you have to understand and explain. It's another messaging and people problem, where the change management, explain to people why we're doing this and how we're all keeping the institution safe, is another big component of being successful. But yeah, at this point, both those things should be underway. If there's anyone listening in that hasn't started with at least multi-factor authentication to secure all those endpoints, logins, you're behind. It's becoming a requirement. It's becoming a requirement for cyber insurance, and it's something that used to be a nice to have, and it's just not at this point. So,
well, and I guess almost like thinking that way, where it's like, hopefully we are reaching maybe some of those people who are like, oh shoot, I gotta like, I got some work to do. But like think through too, it's like almost like, when was the last time you thought about or reviewed like what you're doing, because you might have like a false sense of cybersecurity and needing to just like continuously improve and kind of iterate on what you're doing, where it's like, oh, we don't have like, because I guess I'm thinking like a strong sort of like mobile experience or something to help sort of like supplement, if it's just like, oh, I'm getting like locked out of my computer, I can still try to do something, whatever.
yeah.
Because I think I've seen like just a lot of evolution there with these sort of systems, where it's like, okay, like this is the thing that we use to do the authentications, and you can access it from your phone to give you the code to get in if you're, getting locked out or whatever. But even just like what you're talking about too, of like being able to get a decent level of like self-service, like just being able to like, oh yeah, it's 2 a.m. and I need to like reset a password or do whatever. I've loved seeing more strides in that area. I mean, just anywhere in life, especially in higher education, if they're thinking through like, okay, yeah, we don't need like a human being necessarily to do this sort of like tedious kind of task or something and hold the student up from, submitting their assignment or whatever else.
Right. Yeah, I think that what's surprised, I just talked to an institution at this EDUCAUSE 2022, and I was amazed because when I did the math about how many reset calls they were handling, it's close to $1 million to $1.5 million of IT resource to reset passwords. We have been solving that problem of password reset for 20 years now, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's this balance that comes in, and I think sometimes it's also, look, you're trying to run a behemoth of an institution. You have so many technology solutions and team. The other thing that higher ed has and struggles with is honestly IT resource and cyber resource. There's a shortage globally, right? So, and turnover and other things. So it's hard, I think, also to staff the teams and the resources and prioritize projects like that. But when you do the math, it's like, how can you afford not to, right? From that perspective. I think the other point you highlighted, which is really good, is assuming that everybody started somewhere and has some stuff in place, right? Some authentication, some two-factor, which I'm very much hoping everybody does. The common methods that we've been using, and this is just, it's evolution, honestly, Dustin, of attackers, right? They get smarter, right? So back in the day, maybe a lock on your door with a key was enough, right? And now we have Ring cameras and security systems and glass break sensors and all kinds of monitoring devices and things like that. These are things that evolve because bad actors or threat risk gets higher or smarter. And if you look at anything in the news, there's even FBI and CISA warnings out there that the methods that we've been using. So the classic one is they text you a code, right? That's my favorite one. They text you an SMS code. You put in a username, password, and then they send you, please enter these 5 digits. When it's texted, 2016 is when NIST came out and said that's a very poor security practice. And I will tell you, the majority of the universities and colleges I talk to are using that as their primary authentication method. Push tokens. Push tokens are some of the most common by a very common provider I will not name. Almost every institution uses them because it's easy, because you get this request on your phone as a student or a faculty. You don't have to unlock your phone. You just say, yep, I accept that request and unlock my account. Basically, hackers are attacking that method. So they're doing things like stealing phones, SIM jacking, right? Pretending their phone is yours, basically. They take over the phone number, but they also take over the device. They're also doing silly attacks that you would think wouldn't work, but are amazingly effective, which is they do MFA bombing. So they send you like 20 requests in a row. And you're finally like, fine, like I'll confirm this. I don't know what it is, but I'm getting a ton of requests for this. I must have requested it. Maybe I'm online doing something, whatever it is, but enough annoyance makes somebody just say, fine, confirm. And that attacker is now in. This all stems from what we now trust when we are doing any digital interaction is phones, passwords, tokens. We've removed people completely out of these equations, which was fine until hackers and bad guys now figured out, well, we'll just circumvent these methods and no one's checking if it's really Dustin who's behind the iPhone that's logging in or it's me. And so we're seeing an evolution, and it's still coming, right? I think it's still a few years coming in that a lot of these methods aren't going to suffice. And that is just an evolution of, again, crime. If you think of it that way, the evolution of fraudsters and crime and how people do bad activities. That means you have to revisit your cybersecurity. You have to evolve it over time. It's never done, unfortunately, for a lot of people who probably wish it was. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it could be just that idea of like on an annual basis, you do a review and you could be like, I think we're okay for now. Like just depending on maybe like budgets or what's out there or whatever, like those sort of things. But just like as with a lot of things in life where it's just like, yeah, you can't just like completely set it and forget it because then you're just going to be like reacting to the problem, which is like for better or worse. It's like, okay, fine, great. Like you made a change, but it was only in reaction to, something bad happening or whatever. So, yeah, I think that is definitely a good piece of advice. And, definitely very helpful for folks to have. So we wrap up the episode here. So we will end with our usual concluding question here, and I think it'll be interesting from your perspective. What does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
Again, I think it's that people can look. It's almost the identity and access management definition. It's that they can get to the right resources at the right time for the right reasons and when they need it. When I spoke to one of our customers, he said from an IT leader perspective, his job is to make sure that everyone can fulfill their dream, and that's to get an education. And so a connected campus to me, even though I'm a cybersecurity professional, is one that's safe, but is connected and easy for people to navigate, connect with each other, get the education that they're there to get. And I think that is, if you keep that in mind, that helps balance that security and simplicity as well. But again, think Uber. I want my education when and where I want it. And so how do we do that in a safe way? It's going to be the main part.
Yeah. And I like this episode kind of had a very literal interpretation of a connected campus, literally like plugging in and getting connected to, systems and platforms and everything. But yeah, I mean, like there's, just real dollars and cents, at play here. And obviously, like student is choosing to pursue their higher education. We need to make sure that they're able to do that in a, efficient and secure and user-friendly way. So, just appreciate you talking all about it and sharing all that you did. We'll have ways to connect with you and BioKey and everything in the description for the episode. But just thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Always happy to join again. So thanks, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.